There are two very small parts at the center of this argument, and almost no comparison video has ever mentioned either one. One is a steel pin, about the length of a paperclip, driven crosswise through the bottom of a Marlin receiver. The other is a block of white nylon, roughly the size of a stick of gum, sitting where the bolt stops. Neither part has anything to do with how tight a group either rifle shoots, and between them, they decide this whole fight. I'm Hank Mercer, and this is Gun Rank. One piece of housekeeping. This channel has already ranked the Marlin Model 60 the number 122 in America, and I still think that call was defensible. But a receipt that points one direction only isn't a receipt. Today, the Marlin defends that spot against the one rifle it never had to beat. For 20 years, the internet has settled Ruger 1022 versus Marlin Model 60 with a paper target. Somebody shoots both, measures two groups, crowns a winner. That argument is real, and one of these rifles probably does win it. But it is the top layer of an older fight. So we are doing this differently. 6 categories: practical accuracy, reliability, handling, adaptability, long-term support, legacy. 1 point each, awarded out loud, only after the evidence for it is on the table. No decimals, no pretending I can tell an 8 from a 7. 3 things before we get there. Why the internet is right about the Marlin's accuracy, and wrong about the reason. What the patent record actually says about microgroove. And why a rifle that sold in the millions has no aftermarket, when the answer is not popularity. Start with what everybody thinks they already know. Ask a room full of people who have owned both of these for 30 years, which one shoots tighter out of the box. And the answer comes back Marlin. Not tentatively. The way people answer a question they stopped thinking about long ago. So I went looking for the study, a controlled comparison. Same shooter, same lot of ammunition, same number of groups, both rifles, published methodology. I did not find one. Not from a magazine, not from a lab, not from a manufacturer. What exists instead is 60 years of owner consensus, which is a real thing and a valuable thing, and is not a measurement. So here is the honest version. The Model 60's accuracy advantage is a long-running reputation with a strong mechanical explanation behind it. It is not a controlled result, and the mechanical explanation everybody reaches for is the wrong one. The reason usually given is microgroove rifling, and we will get to that. But 3 plainer things are going on, and 2 have nothing to do with the inside of the barrel. The first is that the older Model 60 carried a 22-inch barrel with more steel than a rifle at that price had any business carrying, longer sight radius, and more mass out front, which makes a light rifle easier to hold still. The second is the way the barrel is attached, and this is where that steel pin comes back. On a Model 60, the barrel is splined, pressed into the receiver, and cross-pinned, a permanent joint. It was set at the factory, and it has never moved since. On a 1022, the barrel sits in a dovetail held by a clamp under 2 screws, a serviceable interface, and a clever one. It is also a variable. Ruger's own guidance is to bring those screws to a specification because the clamp puts real force into the barrel, and a rifle taken apart 3 times by 3 different people is not the rifle that left the factory. One of these rifles has a joint that cannot drift. The other has a joint that can. 2 ways of holding a barrel, chosen 4 years apart, with consequences that outlived everybody who chose them. The third thing is the one nobody wants to hear. In a rimfire, the box on the bench is doing more work than either rifle. A .22 cartridge is sealed at the factory. You take what the lot gives you, which means a 3-shot comparison on a Tuesday afternoon is measuring 1 box of ammunition, once. So, first verdict. Practical accuracy goes to the Marlin Model 60. The consensus is too broad and too consistent to wave off, and the mechanical case behind it is sound. Marlin won, Ruger, nothing. But the internet handed the Marlin that point for the wrong reason, and the right reason is sitting in a patent file almost nobody has opened. Microgroove. Every Model 60 owner knows the pitch. Instead of a handful of deep grooves cut into the bore, Marlin cut 16 very shallow ones. Shallow grooves grip a soft lead bullet without gouging it, and a bullet that leaves the muzzle less deformed flies truer. Marlin put the name on the barrel in script, and generations repeated it as the reason the cheap rifle punches above its weight. The internet remembers microgroove as an accuracy story. Marlin's own engineering record shows it was also a manufacturing story. Here is the paperwork. United States Patent 3,100,358. Rifled gun barrel. Inventor, Thomas R. Robinson, Jr., of New Haven, Connecticut, assigning his rights to the Marlin Firearms Company. The original application went in on the 13th of May, 1953, was refiled as a continuation in '59, and issued on the 13th of August, 1963. And in the opening paragraph, Robinson lists what his barrel is meant to achieve. He does not list one thing, he lists three: low cost of manufacture, extreme accuracy, long useful life. Read that again, because it is the whole video. The accuracy claim and the cost claim are not competing versions of this story. They are in the same sentence, written by the engineer, filed with the government in 1953. Now here is what the accuracy story leaves out. According to William S. Brophy, a ballistics engineer at Marlin, who wrote the definitive company history in 1989, Marlin went looking at Remington's button rifling process around 1950, not for accuracy, for throughput. The old way of rifling a barrel was to cut one groove at a time, pass after pass. Depending on the cutter, that took somewhere between 15 minutes and an hour per barrel. Marlin's engineers built a tungsten carbide button that swaged every groove at once, in a single pass down the bore. Rifling time went from as much as an hour to a few seconds. A few seconds. Sit with what that meant. In 1953, every barrel in the building suddenly cost a fraction of what it used to in machine time, and the tooling lasted longer on top of it. Marlin put it on the Rimfire barrels in July of that year, and trademarked the name weeks later. Then, in the 1954 catalog, sold it to America as an accuracy breakthrough. I want to be precise, because a lazier video calls somebody a liar here. Marlin did not lie. The patent said accuracy from the beginning, and on soft lead rimfire bullets, shallow rifling genuinely does what they claimed. The truth is stranger than a lie. A decision made to move barrels through a factory faster also happened to produce a bore that treats a lead bullet more gently. Efficiency and performance were the same decision. Nobody had to choose. And the receipt cuts both ways. To make the swaging work, microgroove bores came out running larger than standard. In a 22 feeding soft lead, that is fine. Put the same rifling in Marlin's centerfire lever guns, with hard cast bullets, and that oversized bore is exactly why microgroove spent decades with a bad name. Same choice, two calibers, opposite outcomes. So what does that mean for the man holding one of these rifles? It means the Model 60, the rifle America thinks of as the honest, unmarketed, working man's .22, has been running a marketing story about itself since 1954. And the 10-22, the one America calls mass-produced, came out of Bill Ruger's investment casting for exactly the same reason Marlin built that carbide button. Neither of these rifles is a romance. Both are factory decisions that got lucky. The difference is which way the luck ran. If that is the kind of answer you came for, subscribe, because it is the only kind Gun Rank makes. Which brings us to the second small part, the white nylon block. The story you have always heard is that the Model 60 is the simple one. No magazine to lose, none to bend, none to leave in the other range bag, a tube under the barrel, and a rifle that eats whatever is on the shelf. Half of that is true. The eating anything half is not, and the source that says so is Marlin. Open the factory manual. On the ammunition page, the company states the rifle is designed for 22 long rifle high-velocity cartridges, not shorts, not longs, not shot cartridges, and it warns owners off hypervelocity loads. The rifle with the reputation for eating anything is the one rifle here with an ammunition window written down, by its maker, closed at both ends. And the reason the top end is closed is the nylon block. The Model 60's bolt travels rearward and stops against that buffer. It is a wear part, and over decades it dries out, yellows and cracks. When it fails, you get light strikes, failures to feed, failures to eject. That is not a defect. It is a design that spent a cheap sacrificial part instead of a heavier bolt, and that is a sound way to build a rifle. It is also a scheduled consumable, and we come back to what that means in 2026. Now the myth, I actually want to kill, because it appears in every one of these comparisons. People will tell you the tube is more reliable than a detachable magazine, or that it will cycle ammunition a box-fed rifle chokes on. Here is the problem. Both of these rifles are simple blowback semi-automatics. Both run on bolt mass and spring pressure. The feed device is not the action. Whether a given load cycles depends on what it does inside the mechanism, and that varies rifle to rifle and load to load in ways I will not pretend to resolve with owner reports. What I can tell you flatly is that tube versus box does not explain it. Anybody who says it does is describing a magazine and calling it an action. So where does that leave reliability? The Ruger's answer is that rotary magazine, unchanged for 62 years, and worth noting that most 1022 reliability complaints in the wild trace back to aftermarket magazines rather than the rifle. The Ruger's worst day is a magazine you swap in 2 seconds. The Marlin's worst day is a part inside the receiver on a rifle with a written ammunition restriction. Reliability goes to the Ruger 1022, 1-to-1. Now the third thing, and it reframes the entire comparison. Everybody knows the 1022 has the largest aftermarket of any rifle in America. Barrels, triggers, bolts, stocks, receivers, an entire industry built to modify one gun. And everybody knows the Model 60 has essentially nothing. The explanation you always hear is popularity. The Ruger sold better, so the market followed it. That collapses the moment you check the numbers. Marlin's own claim, and it is a manufacturer claim rather than an audited figure, is that the Model 60 passed 11 million rifles. Whatever the exact count, this is not an obscure gun the aftermarket overlooked. It is one of the most owned rifles in the country. So popularity is not the answer. Architecture is. Go back to that steel pin. The Model 60's barrel is spline steel, pressed into a thin-walled aluminum receiver and locked with a cross pin. A permanent joint by design, seated in a light alloy housing never meant to be opened. There is no business case for building precision barrels for that. The 1022 was drawn the other way. A dovetail and a clamp. A fire control group that comes out as a unit on 2 pins. A receiver that was, from the beginning, an interface. So the aftermarket gap is not a verdict the market handed down. It is the consequence of one design decision in 1960 and a different one in 1964. Marlin drew a finished tool. Ruger drew a starting point, and neither company knew what it was choosing. Nobody in New Haven in 1960 was thinking about a customization industry that would not exist for 30 more years. Adaptability to the Ruger, and it is not close. Ruger 2, Marlin 1. Handling is where I have to be careful, because there is no such thing as the Model 60. There are at least 6 meaningfully different generations of this rifle, and the internet flattens them into one gun. The specification you are arguing about depends on which decade yours came out of. The earliest guns had no bolt hold open at all. A manual one came first. The automatic last shot hold open, the one that catches the bolt when the tube runs dry, arrived in 1985. Then, in the late 80s, the 18-round tube was cut to 14. Not for engineering reasons, to fit New Jersey's semi-automatic capacity law, and because the shortened tube now sat visibly short of the muzzle, Marlin brought the barrel from 22 inches down to 19 around the turn of the century, which leaves a strange collector's window. For a few years in the mid-80s, one left the factory with the long barrel, the 18-round tube and the new hold-open at once. It is the most sought-after Model 60 today. So on handling, scored against any Model 60 built from 1985 forward, The Marlin takes it. It tells you when it is empty. The standard 10-22 carbine, 62 years in, still does not. The Marlin loses ground on reloading, and deserves to. But a rifle that locks open on the last shot is telling you something every time you shoot it, and that is worth more over a lifetime than 15 seconds at the bench. Handling to the Marlin, 2-2. Which brings us to legacy, and I am going to make a call some of you will hate. The case for the Marlin is the raw count and the way it got there, and that second part is the piece nobody talks about. The Model 60 did not become ubiquitous through gun stores. It became ubiquitous through department store America. It was sold under the Glenfield name, Marlin's budget label, and private labeled for chains like J.C. Penney, Montgomery Ward, and Western Auto. Marlin did not drop the Glenfield branding until 1983. For 23 years, this was a rifle you picked up in a store that also sold refrigerators. That is how 11 million rifles end up in American closets. Not with a cult, with a distribution channel. The 10-22 came up the other road, drawn in 1964 as the little brother of Ruger's .44 Magnum carbine and sold across gun counters to people who came in to buy a rifle. And here is my call. Legacy goes to the Ruger. I know, fewer closets maybe, but legacy is not a head count. It is influence and endurance, and on both the 10-22 wins on its own paperwork. Still in production, 62 years later, it created a manufacturing sector that did not exist before it, and the Model 60, for all 11 million of them, is a rifle whose own owner stopped building it. Ruger 3, Marlin 2, one category left. Long-term support. This is where the white nylon block finally does its work. Sturm. Ruger bought the Marlin assets out of the Remington bankruptcy in 2020. Roughly $28.3 million. Closed that November. Paid in cash. Documented. In Ruger's own filings. What happened next is also documented. On the fourth quarter 2020 earnings call, Ruger's chief executive Chris Killoy told investors the centerfire lever guns came first, with rimfire products like the Model 60 following behind. By January of 2022, the company said it had no plans to resume production. Go look at the catalog today. The rifle is still listed. Next to it, 3 words: not in production. The popular explanation is that Ruger buried the Model 60 because it would undercut the 10-22. That is plausible. It is not proven. There is no internal document in the public record establishing motive, and I am not handing you a conspiracy because it makes a better ending. There is a duller explanation that fits the same facts. Restarting a dead production line is expensive. The tooling came out of a plant that had been running it badly for a decade, and Ruger's rimfire capacity was already committed to products it designed itself. Both explanations survive the evidence. Only the boring one is documented. The buyer does not care about motive. The buyer cares about consequences, and the consequence is this: a rifle out of production since 2020, with a sacrificial nylon part inside that will eventually need replacing, no aftermarket barrel industry because of a pin, and a parts supply down to old stock and small batch makers. Millions are out there, and they will keep running a long time, but that curve only goes one way. The 10-22 is still being built, still being serviced, and still has more spare parts made for it than any rifle in America. Long-term support to the Ruger. Final card, Ruger 4, Marlin 2. So here is the verdict, plainly, because I said I would not hide behind "they're both great." For standard, all-around ownership, the Ruger 10-22 is the better rifle, and on the card, it is not close. And now I can tell you exactly what the internet got wrong. It was never wrong about the Marlin shooting well. It may well be the better shooter, and I gave it that point first, before anything else. What the internet got wrong is treating a win in one dimension as a win overall. The Model 60 took the 2 columns the internet argues about constantly, and lost the 4 it never scores at all. But flip one thing, and the card flips with it. If you are the owner who will never modify anything, who shoots 200 rounds a year at squirrels and tin cans, who wants a rifle that arrived finished and does not care that the aftermarket ignores it, because the aftermarket was never seeing a dollar from you anyway. Then adaptability is worth nothing to you, and long-term support means one spare part in a drawer. Take those two columns off the card, and a clean, older Model 60 is the better rifle for you, and that is not close either. So tell me my weighting is wrong. But do it the way we do it here. Name which of the 6 you would drop, and what you would put in its place. And before somebody says it, yes, I left the Marlin 795 and the 1022 takedown off this card on purpose. If you think one belongs in this fight, make the argument. Here is what I keep coming back to. These two rifles were drawn 4 years apart, by men who did not know each other, solving the same problem for the same country. They answered it in opposite ways. Marlin drew a finished thing. A rifle that arrived complete, barrel pinned in place, nothing left to decide, sold through the same store where a family bought a washing machine. It went into the corner of a closet and stayed exactly as it was for 40 years. It did not need you. That was the point. Ruger drew something unfinished on purpose. A clamp instead of a pin. A receiver with places to attach things. A rifle that was never done and could keep becoming whatever the next owner needed it to be. That is the real difference between them, 62 years on. One survives because people remember it. The other survives because it can still change. The Model 60 is a monument. The 1022 is a conversation. Marlin built a rifle so complete that when the world moved, it could not follow. I have watched a lot of very good designs die exactly that way, and it was almost never because they were bad. So if there is a Model 60 in the house, understand what you are holding. Not a discontinued budget rifle, a finished object from a country that used to sell rifles next to refrigerators, built by an engineer whose name almost nobody knows, carrying rifling invented to save a factory time, that made a generation of shooters look better than they were. Keep it running. Keep a spare buffer in the drawer. And the next time somebody tells you the internet settled this one with a paper target, tell them they were reading the wrong page.